All right. Well, you are where you need to be. So welcome. All right, so we're going to jump into this. The first set of questions that we have are just sort of assessing the prior engagement period, the prior plan and process that you just heard about. That's going to then lead to a second set of questions, which are more so about kind of moving forward. What kind of indicators should we be using? What kind of objectives should we be focusing on as part of the process? And then we have a third question that's kind of building upon that and looking back at ourselves to ask the question, how can you help us do a better job of engagement moving forward? So the first question that you'll see here is take a look at our engagement objectives, tools for engaging people who we wanted to engage, and outcomes from the recent I-205 toll project engagement below. They can also be found in the I-205 toll project engagement plan. So the question here is, did we have the right objectives? If the answer was no, what did we miss? And you can see here, I'll just highlight it for you. The objectives were to increase awareness about the following, and then gather input, as you can see on those as well below. So any thoughts? And let's maybe so we can make sure to use a lot of time, make sure we got everybody's perspective incorporated. How about we do a little bit of just some initial quick thoughts. You don't have to share like everything that's on your mind, but we can go around the room, and maybe we can start with Kari. Do you have any thoughts you want to share?
Sure. And maybe just first a clarification. So think the right objectives, this is based on the engagement that you just did. There was a bunch of feedback and you want to do more in the future. And so the objectives are what you're doing more in the future to build on what you just did, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Did we have, that's right.
Okay. I guess under the increase awareness piece, there's a couple things that I feel like I keep hearing about it, I'm not seeing, and those are, they're related, but really, how the money will be spent, and what the constraints may be, and being able to increase awareness around that. And I think, related to, maybe that falls within opportunities and constraints within the project, but being more specific about, what we talked about earlier with the corridor, what that is, where the money can be spent, what the money can be spent on. And then I think the other piece that, continuously comes up and has come up several times for me in just the meeting today is how to address the need for better transportation options, so that the impacts that people are concerned about are being addressed, and what that looks like. I don't know, we haven't answered all these questions, but I think that needs to really be in the mix. It's my initial thought.
Great. So there's an increased awareness piece, and also kind of an education and kind of clarification component of showing how the better transportation options can be effectively funded through this project. Is that right? Am I encapsulating that correctly?
I think so.
Okay, great, thank you. What about Bill? Any thoughts on your end?
Are we referring to the engagement summary document?
Can you say that again? Sorry, it's a little hard to hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are we referring to the engagement summary document? I sort of missed the beginning part of the breakout room.
Yeah, we're basically, big picture, we're talking about retrospective. What did we do as part of the process on the community engagement front? What did we do well? What did we not do so well? And what should we maybe think about carrying over moving forward. And so the question here specifically is, did we have the right objectives? And you know, if there's anything that we feel like is missing, anything that you feel should be tweaked. In particular, you know, we're here to try to advance equity as part of this project, right? So how do we optimize for equity when we're thinking about our community engagement objectives?
I think a lot of those objectives are pretty good. When I was looking through the summary, though, there's not much there about Southwest Washington. If you do a Control F, Clark County comes up 6 times, Southwest Washington comes up 4 times. 4 of those times that Southwest, or 2 of those times that Southwest Washington comes up, it's the name of an organization. I mean, I understand ODOT represents Oregon, but when you're working on a project that covers 2 states, it's disappointing how much or lack of engagement there is within Southwest Washington, because there's going to be 70,000 of us using either the 205 or I-5 tolls, and that's a big deal. And it just seems like we're being overlooked. And I can see that because it's a different state, different agency, but we're a region. So people here, no matter where they live, are going to use these services or use these facilities, and we need to make sure that there's input from everybody. It seems like there's a good job being done of input from minority populations, low income populations, wherever they are, but it doesn't really do a good job at defining Southwest Washington or anything along those lines. And so that was the point.
So making sure to kind of break up the reporting out based on geographies.
Yes,
various
please.
different geographies. Yeah. Okay. That
Thank
makes
you.
sense. For sure. What about Amanda? Any thoughts on your end?
Yeah, so I just had a couple of, I don't know, comments, I guess. So in terms of transparency, I think the clear communication of what this is and what this isn't, I think is important. And then I also think feedback to people about how their information was used is really important in terms of rebuilding or initially building or maintaining trust. And so I think particularly with BIPOC communities, having that communication informed by BIPOC communities, because I think what happens as a, from my own observation as a working for a government agency, but also as a member of BIPOC community, that what community engagement professionals and staff and agencies tend to think that they're doing in terms of communicating what the connections are doesn't always come through to folks who have provided the input, and they don't see their input in there. And so I think even though we can't always take everyone's ideas and suggestions, and we can't do what they're asking, I think including them in the conversation about what we did do with what we heard. So I don't know where that fits in this. And maybe that's not what you're really asking, but those are the things that are bubbling to the surface for me.
Yeah. No, and I definitely, I mean, it's critical, right? And part of what we, in terms of circling back with the community and reporting out how the information was used in the project, and part of what we're doing, what was done today, is sharing some of that input that was received and circling back to y'all. But how is that done more broadly to the community? You know, so it's a good point. I guess my question to you is like, how would we turn that into, or just think about that moving forward as we're thinking about indicators as part of the project moving forward? How would we turn that into something that we can measure on the community engagement front? So something to think about.
Yeah, I was trying to think about that in terms of the evaluation criteria, maybe, and how that, you know, what that would actually, like, what that actually looks like. And it's not just like counting the times that information was shared back, right? Like, it's more about that connection of what we heard and what we did with it. Because I think we say that we do that a lot, and I think in our minds sometimes we are doing that, but I don't think that always comes through to community. And so where are they involved in that in describing that and in helping, like, that we're all on the same page about what we did with people's information. And so I have to think about that in terms of a metric, I guess, because it feels very qualitative to me. And so
yeah, well, qualitative indicators are also good to have. So let's think about that one moving forward. Let's see, who else haven't we heard from yet? How about, so I know Michael, we haven't heard from you, right? And Abe, so either of you feel free to jump in.
Hey there. I agree with what has been said so far. I think that, under our current conditions of being in a pandemic, there's been a lot of work that has gone in, and I think a lot of comments have come in. So that is, really good to see. I think where my mind goes to is what Kari was talking about, and it's really understanding, like, how does this project fit into the context of the larger tolling plans that Brendan was sharing. And it just, it seems like you can talk about one project as a start, but you're only getting like a small piece of information and providing input on a small piece of something much bigger, like, helping create an appetizer, and you don't know what the whole meal is going to be. And so I think it would be important to really elevate, like, the latest thinking on what ODOT has in mind for the region. And then Brendan was also highlighting a lot of the projects and like, really implying that, like, revenues from tolling would go to those. And I feel like there's a disconnect where we're not seeing community kind of engagement on that piece, and particularly an equity focus on, if there's going to be tolling across the region. I think there has to be a conversation around, what kind of affordable alternatives are going to be made available. And I think the first thing that comes to mind most often is, like, thinking about transit and having a really robust transit network. And there's some details that we've learned about of constitutional restrictions that it's difficult to get to that. So I think kind of putting all of that out on the table for input would be really important.
So having specific questions focused around the affordability question, and particularly around alternatives in the context of the larger kind of regional tolling concept. And
like, I think 50% of the comments were from from Clackamas. And so I think, if we are talking about a bigger scope and, like, what does this mean for the region, that, would mean we need to hear from, other areas as well, more robustly.
Similar to what I think was a bill that was noting that about the geographic, and making sure to hit on different geographic areas, not just in terms of the focus, but also the reporting out. That makes a ton of sense. Abe, any thoughts on your end?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I would almost, I don't know if I can, like, underline or highlight what Amanda has on really clearly demonstrating how input is being used and how it's affecting the project, and showing that nexus of where somebody's voice is actually having an impact on the project. I don't know if I'm coming at this at a good time, because we're updating our community health improvement plan for Clackamas County, and we're talking about objectives, and I have SMART drilled into my head. So I don't know if we want to be thinking about kind of like the SMART aspect to these objectives, and outlining any details around those for this public engagement plan piece, but I would throw that out there as ways to increase transparency for some of these objectives around who we're trying to increase awareness for and within what time, and how does that align with the project, and demonstrate some of the measurables to the objectives in addition to the indicators that we'll be talking about. I'm also wondering, something that's come up a lot today is trust and transparency in both our conversations and our prompt, and a lot of the feedback collected from the surveys. So, and thinking about the framework that we just adopted into our charter, a lot of those pieces fall into that trauma-informed perspective and the symptoms of a community that's experienced some form of trauma. So I'm wondering if it's almost worth elevating a whole objective around that, around trust or transparency in some way, to really, I know something that's been right around in my head around too, is what gets measured gets managed. And so really elevating that in the public engagement plan.
That's a really good point. Yeah, the trauma-informed perspective obviously wasn't something that we had before as integrated into the outreach process. So certainly keeping that top of mind and thinking about that lens as we move forward is going to be important. You mentioned SMART, Abe, for the benefit of others who haven't heard or used that before. Do you want to just sort of kind of convey what it stands for?
Spot on those. So what is strategic, measurable, ambitious, realistic, time-bound. And I particularly like what I've heard is SMART goals, which is you add an inclusive and then an equitable on the end. So thinking through all of those aspects when you're developing objectives. It's a very jargony acronym.
That's good though. Thanks for sharing. And I want to do a quick time check. How are we doing on time? I'm guessing we've probably eaten up about 15 minutes or so. Is that right? Who's taking time here?
I'm helping with time. It'd be good to move on to the next question.
Okay, great. So Hannah, do we have about like 5
real
minutes left on this item, or?
Oh no, we have another. So for question 2, we have 20 minutes, and then for question 3, we have 5 minutes.
Yeah, but we're still on question 1 right now.
Right.
So how are we doing on question 1? We have like 5 minutes left on question 1, or?
No, we're kind of at time on question 1. But
okay.
Do folks feel? Do we want to spend more time on there?
Well, there's a couple components here, as you can see, to question 1, and maybe some of what we've already talked about helps to answer some of it. But did we have the right voices previously? Here are some of the voices that we had noted. And maybe what we can do is spend no more than 3 minutes. And so it'd have to be some real quick input from folks. So feel free to just like throw them out, if there's any thoughts in regards to the voices piece that's missing from here. From this
small businesses.
Small businesses.
In the engagement summary document, you have outreach to small businesses in Oregon City and West Lynn, but it doesn't say anything about small businesses along the corridor as a whole.
Okay. So small businesses more generally or along the corridor.
And then just to beat the same drum, geographical area and highlighting Southwest Washington.
Okay. Yeah.
That's going to be a reoccurring theme for me. I'm sorry.
Oh, good. Beat that drum, man.
Keep it coming, Bill.
Kari, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I know that there is some more specifics in the underrepresented and underserved communities that have been called out, but I think looking at an audience that is, whether they're transit dependent or, from the disability community, unable to drive, something that captures that piece of the population that is unable to drive, whether that's economic or a physical reason or a choice. I think that's a really, really important constituency here in terms of when we're talking about what the overall transportation system looks like. I think that would also capture what I don't remember seeing, but is really the constituency that I represent a lot is youth voices, and that is in that arena. But really conversations with youth, especially because they don't tend to be part of these conversations.
Yeah, I don't see anything here based on age, right? There's no seniors, there's no youth specifically here, so that's good. And the other thing, another way of saying transit dependent populations is people without a car. So that's another way of looking at it too. Any other thoughts before we move on from this here? Hate to rush us, but
yeah, I would just add to small businesses that are dependent on cars. So thinking about non-emergency medical transportation or taxi companies or any groups that are constantly driving through that are, and I think that's a little bit separate than freight, but kind of a similar line in that regards. And then just I would suggest and recommend defining some of these groups in the document and delineating the differences between elected officials and statewide interests and policymakers to add more transparency around those terms and who exactly we're talking about with those groups.
Also, was that Abe speaking?
Yeah.
Yeah, hey Abe. So I think, one thing in terms of transportation related businesses that are auto dependent, the other thought that generated for me, we don't have to add it, but there are a lot of low income populations that are also auto dependent where they don't actually have an option, a public transportation option, for example. So that's just something to think about too.
Definitely.
In terms of making sure we're reaching out to populations in need. So any final, let's take like one more thought, and then you can always circle back with this for additional input too. So anybody else who hasn't spoken yet want to share something as it relates to the right voices? Okay, well, we can move on. Again, feel free to share if something else comes to mind later on. Josh and Hannah, should we skip this here and kind of this question in regards to moving on to the meat we're really trying to get to, which is question 2? Or do you feel like we should have a little bit of conversation here?
I would just put out there that this group has a lot of public engagement experts. So if there's a tool that we just completely missed, we definitely would like to hear it.
Yeah. So chew on that one. Shoot us some thoughts. Who would be the best person to share this with? If anybody has any thoughts on tools.
Me.
Okay. So send Hannah any ideas that you have in regards to community engagement tools to be able to reach, in particular, the hard to reach populations where we're not hitting the mark, and that we know are just, government agencies traditionally have a more difficult time engaging. So please.
Hey, this is Garrett. Sorry, I'm this is my 4th day at ODOT. I'm the policy manager for the project.
Sorry, great. I forgot to introduce you.
Oh, no worries.
Feel free to introduce yourself.
I had previously worked here at the other end of the table where you're at as a community organizer in Wilsonville for a group I have there, and then for the city of Tualatin. For this question, I did think of text messaging, and I just, I think that can be a real benefit. I've seen that in groups, but then also that there's a lot of trust there as well. So I didn't know if that was something that you all had feedback or experience with.
I don't know how this works in the Portland metro area, but within Clark County, we have a senior tax deferred program, and you can go to the online GIS website and find these addresses. So at the moment, I'm stuffing surveys for 600 folks in North Clark County. So I'm wondering if you can find that information for folks in the Portland metro area and maybe do mailings or sort of targeted stuff to them.
And
Just go ahead.
faith-based groups like newsletters and in regard to culturally specific populations, sometimes that's a good way because those are trusted communities. They're not, they don't all do newsletters, but different types of communications that they share with their members.
I was just going to say, I was really happy to hear from the community engagement liaisons. And I think like doubling down on that effort is a great way to really get rich feedback. And so often it's like not quite as large as a survey in terms of quantity, but you get a lot of quality out of that. And if there's opportunity to really focus in on BIPOC communities for that targeted deep engagement, I highly recommend that.
Yeah, it's good to retain the things that are working, right? To your point. So moving on to question.
One other quick note.
Oh. Try to move on, guys. No.
In terms of the texting, I do think that is an exciting idea to reach people. At PBOT, we've used a tool called Slick Text to get feedback on, like when we have our healthy business program, we like put on the sidewalk, you know, a text number where people can text in and comment. So I guess, you know, there'd be some thinking through like, how would that work when you're talking about tolling on a highway where, you know, people aren't walking there, but, you know, potentially near it or just in areas where people may see it. I think a lot of people are tuned into texting, you know, as a way to engage, and it's an easy lift, and you don't have to like necessarily like go look at other things. So I don't know. I think it's a cool way to like start the conversation with people.
Very good, very good. All right, so moving on to question number 2. Time check here, just to make sure we don't go over. Hannah, how are we doing? How much time do we have for question number 2?
We have 15 minutes for question number 2.
Okay. So this is, as I noted before, this is probably the most important question. We've been building towards this. And it's how, you know, what do we do moving forward? So do we have the right indicators to measure success? If not, how do we measure engagement and ensure we have equitable processes that lead to engagement or to equitable outcomes? So here you have the indicators that have been used. You kind of take a few seconds to look through these if you haven't already memorized them, and then we can jump in on this question, and this will be followed up by another one, by the way. But do we have the right indicators? If not, what should we be using? So any thoughts here?
I can jump in.
Yeah, go for it.
A couple things jump out at me. The first one is just the difficulty of obtaining a high level of satisfaction with something that people are not happy about. That just seems hard and somewhat in conflict. And so I'm not sure what it would look like, but I wonder if you're trying to get satisfaction with the process that you're going through for the input, you know, just expressing it in a different way. Because to me, that reads like, are you satisfied with this information that we presented to you? And what we've seen is that clearly the answer is no. And so that's going to be reflected here as well, right? So that's the first thing. The second was the thing about trust again. You know, I think if this is, you know, a survey or a website or an open house that has ODOT's name all over it, and ODOT is not a trusted government entity, then that's a problem, and that's going to continue to be a problem. And that's something that I think, as Amanda and others have, you know, said, I think, you know, in transparency and bringing back information and talking to people about what you're doing with the input that they've already provided is going to be a way to get through that trust issue. And I think that's going to be really important on the one hand. And on the other hand, it sounds to me like those community liaisons were amazing and did some phenomenal work. And can we have more of them? I mean, you know, I think that model as a person who, you know, works in the community and works a lot with community partners, that model of, you know, finding a trusted community leader and having them lead the conversation and having them bring all that information forward, You know, it's been shown time and time again that that works really, really well. It's expensive, but it gives you really great information. And so just, I don't know if that actually goes into this one, but I wanted to say it anyways, because I think it seems like a really good source of information and trust building.
Yeah, and it might seem like an expensive expense, but I mean, let's be real. These projects cost a lot of money. So when you look at it in terms of the overall project costs, it's peanuts, and you know, might very much well, you know, pay dividends to your point. Yeah, no, this is great stuff. Any other thoughts? Any other thoughts as it relates to the indicators here? Also, by the way, Kari, I like your point about trust. You know, you can come in with a project, but if the entity itself is not trusted, it might be a great project, but you know, there's some residual effects there that might take place. Amanda, Bill, Michael, Abe.
Echo something, or maybe not echo, but just the trust issue. So it doesn't really answer question 2, but in regards to trust, I feel like there's strong messaging that we're going to take your money, and there's not very strong messaging on what we're going to do with your money. So I would want to see more of, these are the projects we have in the pipeline that could be funded, and this is how you're going to benefit from it, because you're not going to get people to be excited to give you guys money. Not in this climate, not with all the other social issues we have going on. Like, this is just another burden adding on to the rest of the burdens that people are dealing with. And so I feel like it's a big ask, and not going through and really describing the benefits of it. I mean, there's some here and there, but I don't know. I feel like I would be hard pressed to identify some without additional work. And I sit on the committee. So for folks who are just hearing this from a community liaison or seeing something out in the public and being, oh, tolls, great. Like, I am excited.
Well, yeah, and especially like you said, now congestion is not what it was before. And so the very thought of like, okay, this is gonna solve congestion. Awesome, get this over to me as soon as possible. It doesn't ring as true right now, but you know, how do we couch that within the longer arc of, like, hey, this is probably a blip in time. Congestion over the long run is probably going to continue increasing, right? So how do you frame it within that context? But it's a very good point also that you raise in terms of what does this get you, and in the sort of the selling point in that regard. But.
Well, and I think there's issues that are outside of ODOT's control as well. So just sort of the general society of living in the United States right now. You see a lot of people, or a lot of high earners, who are not pulling their fair share, and then you're asking people who are living in low to middle classes to provide more for goods that affect all of us. I think that's just a hard sell. I don't expect ODOT to be able to, like, yes, we can fix this problem. This is out of your control. This is a federal problem, but I think you get a lot of anti-government because of it, because you're asking people to pull more of their share than what's equitable.
So one thing I'll just say is that let's think about, as we're providing input on like this, right? Like, let's think about, how do we turn this into an indicator? How do we turn this into a measure of success? Just something for us to think about, right? I don't know what the answer is, but let's keep that framed, because that's in terms of community engagement, that's where we're at right now. We can also take some of this and hold it for our next round of conversations too, as it relates to outcomes, because some of this is definitely related to the kind of outcomes that we're seeking the project. But aside from the community engagement piece.
Thank you for reining me in.
No. It's all good stuff. It's all good stuff. Michael, who else wants to jump in here?
This is Amanda. I don't have a thought about how to turn Bill's ideas into metrics or outcomes, but I had another thought. Around project information that's translated and provided in compatible formats. One of the things that I know we run up against in my world, that really technical information, it can't just be translated right? It needs to be the people that are coming up with the information need to be bicultural and native speakers, or, you know, bilingual and not just like sort of bilingual. I mean, it needs to be folks from the community typically to make those messages make sense. And just as an example, not that everyone that speaks Spanish is from Mexico, certainly, but toll roads in Mexico are not accessible to the general population. They're really expensive, they're really nice, and they're fast because no one's on them, because they're not accessible to the general population. And so I think if you start talking about tolls without some context about what that means in phrasing and communications that make sense to somebody, then they're just going to think it doesn't have to, you know, like it's 100% not attainable. And so I think a way to measure that or think about that in terms of an outcome would be around the vendor that, or I don't know if you guys use staff or vendors for translating materials, but that the people that are doing that work should be from the community, that they're, you know, a member of whatever community they're turning information into a particular language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me as someone that has traveled through Mexico, and the fact that you might have that lens, right? That maybe this is going to be different from that. Making sure to state what that difference is, and having the right people to message that. That's awesome. Other thoughts? And I want to just note that you know, we're getting some really good input here, so thank you. We do have one additional question. We could end up skipping this question if folks are feeling like they want to provide additional input as it relates to question number 2. Again, this is the most sort of critical part of the conversation today, so I'm happy to jettison number 3 in order for us to get what we need today. So
a couple thoughts on
go for it,
Dave. So to try to get at the trust thing question, I'm wondering if there's something, and I guess it's kind of dependent on how we're collecting all of this information to measure success, but if there is any type of survey, whether it's along the lines of I believe my input will improve my community for myself or for my community or for the region overall, and I believe my input will be used in a meaningful way or will affect the process, and something to wordsmith with, or potentially like a trust scale indicator of in a survey. Not sure if there's something there or not. I'm wondering too if there's like a metric around the percentage of resources of kind of like the outreach budget that are devoted to community liaisons or community organizations that are doing the translation or the transcreation, to show how this process and this project and these dollars are going back in the community in whatever way, and empowering community members to participate in the planning process. And that kind of aligns with that trauma-informed approach as well.
You can absolutely do that. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and then
I've seen it done before.
Maybe like an indicator around, I don't know how to measure hope. Hope seems like a really hard thing to measure, but hopefulness around the project is another idea. Then my final thoughts are just to organize the indicators by what ODOT can control and what ODOT can't, to make these results a little bit easier to quickly digest, and then showing a scoring matrix for these, and to show like the points or what looks like success and what doesn't, for the indicator list.
Excellent. I'm going to open it up to other members of the project team. Josh, Hannah, Garrett, do you have anything that's been said that you wanted to just sort of like tap into a little bit more, dig a little deeper, or hasn't been said, something you really want to make sure is a question that does not, we don't leave the room without today?
I'll just say I'm the anonymous goose taking notes there. I don't know why I'm called anonymous goose, but I think these are great. I think measures that address a lack of trust, I think these are things we can dig into. We don't have one right now, and clearly we need one, right? Are we clearly communicating the benefits of this, the potential benefits of the total project? We need a measure on that. This is part of the engagement. It's showing that we are, you know, kind of closing these gaps. There's some big gaps right now in project understanding. And, you know, certainly I want to take a look at project expenditures and how we're engaging, how we're spending those dollars or distributing those for different levels of engagement. So Chris, I think there's great stuff in here.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly build on Abe's comment of, so I used to be a history teacher. And so whenever you use percentages, I'm thinking of like 60% is an F or below. And that's not necessarily what's represented here. And so like a Likert scale where strongly agree to strongly disagree, it removes some of that, like the numerics of it. And percentages anyways are really hard to communicate and people understand or don't understand them. So kind of when it with the more feelings-based scale, I think it could better reflect the kind of qualitative input we're looking to get.
Josh, your comments.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Josh, your comments about, you know, gaps. It makes me think about too, like, you know, how transparent are we about the current conditions around, like, I know there's information on, like, I think it was like 6 hours, you know, of time at, you know, spent in congestion, but I am curious too about, you know, are we communicating like current air quality issues, and like, you know, what would it mean if you know, if there's tolling, then like, you know, how does that impact that future airspace and what people are breathing? And just kind of trying to think through some of those, I guess, other, you know, other elements that sit a little bit outside of, you know, the just sort of the focus in on the price thing. I feel like there's other elements too that are important to bring up in these discussions. I'm not sure how that translates exactly into a measure of success, but I guess it's sort of like a holistic view at tolling. Go ahead, Kari.
Thanks. Those are great thoughts. I just wanted to ask a process question that I probably should have asked at the beginning, but I'm just curious what the timeline is for this. I think especially given, you know, the sort of re-looking at the system as a whole. And I think even outside of that, even before that, I've been having this question of, you know, if folks are going back out to do, you know, there's this sort of information that's come in and it's not complete, and there's going to be another effort to go back out and get more information. When does that happen? Because I think that, you know, sort of potential for the pandemic lockdown to end and things to come back to normal, and also the impact on the transportation system of what that means, but also just how people will think about this, and also how people will be able to interact. I mean, are we looking at doing the same thing that we've had to do in the last 6-9 months because of the restrictions and having to be online? Or is this far enough out in the future that it is actually more of a sort of standard engagement process where the outcomes might be different?
I can jump in on that. That's a really good question, Kari. Right now, for closing the loop on this comment period and this engagement, we're still looking through the comments, and we are going to go back out to the Region 1 Act in February, at the beginning of February, and we'll also have a agency partner update before then, and that's where we're going to we'll come back out with some recommendations after reading through these comments and talking with people. That's where ODOT's gonna make recommendations for what next steps would be. So those next steps haven't been decided yet as far as like, you know, what the approach is. So that would happen in the beginning, probably like first quarter of 2021. And then, you know, from there, we would develop an engagement plan for what it would look like. I mean, I think for right now, engagement is looking like, yes, it will be virtual for 2021. That is what it is looking like, what we're planning for. I hope it changes.
I just want to add that I think what we're finding is that even when we can do engagement in person, that we're looking at, or we're getting requests at least to do hybrid types of situations where they're in person and online. And so I feel like that is probably our new future in the community engagement world. I mean, in addition to just straight in-person things. This is a side note.
Yeah, Amanda, since you were just speaking, I was curious. I forgot what the sort of the point was that you had in question round number 1 that were like, hey, let's circle back with that to see how we could turn that into an indicator. Do you remember what it was? Because I forgot. I thought I had it here on my notes, but I'm having to.
That was so long ago. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, it was around how are we giving information back to communities in a way that they feel like they're getting information back, I guess would be the short version of that, because I think we think we're doing that, but they're not, but communities don't always see the connections that we think we're making. And so involving, I think the best way to get at that would be to involve people from communities in this, like, here's what we heard and here's what we think we're doing with that. And or, you know, get their input or get their help or, you know, whatever, compensate them to help do that.
Great. And so I'm glad we got that in there. Anything else that we may have missed at this point? Speak now or forever hold your peace. And I think, Hannah, how are we doing on time? Should we move on to the final question? Are we out of time? Where are we at?
We're over time.
We're over time. What?
One thing to say real quick.
That's okay.
Right.
This is amazing. This is great. Thank you.
I've been hesitant to say it because it's the same message all along, but responses from geographical areas. So you're just getting a lot of people from downtown replying how equitable is that for the whole region.
Yeah, definitely. Let's get that in there too. So so then, Hannah, we now need to move on into the larger group, is what you're saying, or are we done with the time for this question?
Yeah, we're 5 minutes over.
Okay. So so let's move on then. Everybody on the same page. Everybody understand how to get back to the larger group. Any questions about that? You have to click on that. You got to click on that other link that you had, right, to be able to circle back to the larger group.
Yeah, go back to the first link. And just as far as the last question, you know, sit on it, and it's really just for us to know like how we can work with you to better reach people. Like, how do you, I mean, you're already doing so much, but you know, if there are other areas of your work that we can tap into, or people that, you know, we can make contact with, or other ideas. That's what that last question is about.
Josh, can you scroll down real quick just so we can see it?
Chris, you've got the scroll control there.
Oh, sorry. Down to question number 3.
Oh, yeah.
So how will you support future engagement? What can you do to help us out, whether it be like hosting, co-hosting meetings, you know, helping to get surveys out, and really trying to amp up our engagement moving forward.
I know we're over time, but I have a question about this. And so should I send it to somebody, or should I just ask it?
Is it a big question? Is it a long question? Go ahead.
Well, I don't think it's a long question, but I don't know. So when community engagement was happening in Washington County, where I work, or other counties, how is that communicated? Because if that, and I'm just going to say this, so if that's, I work in a really big organization, so it's possible that there were things happening that parts of the organization knew about, but that I didn't know about, and I am community engagement manager. And so I would encourage multi touch points around when opportunities are happening, or to talk more about what types of things can happen. I mean, some of our most successful community engagement efforts have been just going into existing community meetings that already exist and just asking them if we can get some time on their agenda to ask questions or get information or hear people's thoughts or get their ideas or whatever. And I think my office, me and my Office of Equity and Inclusion and Community Engagement can make a lot of those connections, but if we don't know it's happening, then it's harder to do.
Yeah, to know and with substantial advance notice, right? Sounds like it would be ideal.
As much as there can be.
Right on. Well, hey, everybody.
It's a reoccurring theme, but better communication, better collaboration, bring people in from the beginning, better planning. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you, everybody, so much. Great input, great discussion. And I'll see you back in the larger group session right now. Thank you.